You are now tuned into the Big Dawg Shyt Podcast with your host, George Tucker. Black Card Bully Cam. The Big Dawg Shyt Podcast. Black Card Bully Cam. Get ready for the Big Dawg Shyt Podcast with your host, George Tucker.
The Big Dawg Shyt Podcast. We about to put you up on this dog game.
Welcome to another episode of Big Dawg Shyt. And I'm your host, George Tucker of Black Card Bully Camp, owner of the infamous ambassador of the big ropes, Botox. Tonight we're going to be speaking on a sore subject, an exciting subject at sometimes, a very sore subject at others, our breeding programs. And when I say breeding, I'm talking about from the time of your female, I'll even go back before that, from the time of deciding that there's a stud you're interested in until the time of having a dog that is ready to be sold, a litter of puppies that are ready to be sold. This is one of the most nerve-wracking, money-burning, heartbreaking, gut-wrenching experiences that may cause you to ultimately decide that this is not even for you. And what I mean by that is, we all have the excitement of looking at dogs online, hurry up and locking a dog in. Well, that may not be as much of a risk when you're talking about bullies as it is when you're talking about Frenchies. And I'm going to be speaking on both aspects. The picking of a bully stud, the timing of locking in a bully stud, the picking of a Frenchie stud, and the timing of locking in a Frenchie stud. Well, with bullies, it's oftentimes about the color, the structure, the size, and the bloodline. And not more than the bloodline, the actual pedigree. That's not going to change much once you see the dog has gotten to be about 6-7 months old. The only risk you have then is timing. When I say about timing for that would be, how long would it be before your female goes in heat, and whether it's timely for you to go ahead and lock the dog in on the price that he's at when you first see him advertised and you feel like that may be a stud you want to put in your program. The peril of not locking that dog in right then is that if he becomes more popular, after you saw him, knew you liked him, considered locking him in, the price may be different when you decide later to use him because you didn't take advantage of the price at the time. You know how you see these things on Instagram and people say, hey, tomorrow's prices are not today's prices, or today's prices are not yesterday's prices. That definitely applies to stud fees on dogs that are either going to be hot or dogs that have gotten hot. Or you're just trying to forecast, sometimes you have an eye, and it may just fit the fact that that's what you'd like to add to your program, even if he's not hot. He's just a dog that you favor. So that's the first thing you have to deal with is choosing a stud. Well, a couple of things may happen. I mean, it's happened to me before. You pick a stud and you're hoping, in many cases, a young male is ready at 7, 8, 9 months. You're definitely safe to be able to predict out 10 months. Well, what happens sometimes is your female may go in heat just before that stud is ready. And now what you run a risk on, especially when you're talking about Frenchies, not so much as bullies, but in both situations, your concern is being in the first wave of people with quality puppies often, because I'm hoping that if you invest in money in a stud for your program, that you're going to be sending you're going to be using sperm from an outside breeder, that you're going to be doing that to a female that is going to produce the kind of puppies that are going to take your program to the next level. And one of the worst things that can happen to someone trying to get ahead of the game is if your female goes in heat just before that stud is ready. So that means now you either skip the heat or you breed to another dog. And then all of the people that dogs comes in right after that stud is in heat, of course, they're going to be 6 months ahead of you because your dog won't be back in heat for another 6 months. That's one of the things you have to deal with. And that's in the case where you don't have a stud or access to a stud that you think would really benefit your program. So sometimes you end up taking a loss on a puppy, a male puppy, just for the reason I just mentioned it. You prefer to have a stud on your yard. And when I say taking a loss, you're taking a chance because if you buy a male puppy, if he doesn't become a commercially marketable, worthy stud, then you just have a dog that's good for your yard or your program. And hopefully he works out for you. Hopefully in the bully world, the female you have clicks with him. But in the Frenchie world, when you start talking about locking in these studs, I had to learn the hard way with that too, that DNA is a big issue. And if you lock in a dog too early, you don't know what's going to be available or hot. Either way, there may be better DNA by the time your female that you really like to spend the money on would like to see go to this particular dog that you are possibly locked in as a pup. You end up locking him in when you locked in with him, maybe not even a pup, but you saw him, you locked him. And you find out that your female may be 4 months away, or she may be young and she comes in heat so young that she comes in too early for you to breed her. And that's heart-wrenching because sometimes, I like to wait until a female is 10 months old, 9 to 10 months. It all depends on her development. But what if your female comes in heat at 7 months? Well, your female comes in heat at 7, you can't breed her, or you shouldn't breed her, or I wouldn't breed her. Now, I won't say shouldn't. I'm not going to breed her until her next heat. Well, you've locked in on this dog, and I've done that before too. I jumped in on a dog that I liked a whole lot when I first saw him, Champagne Poppy. By the time I got around to Champagne Poppy, they had so much stuff out here. I've never even used him. I got two. I've locked him in, never used him. Don't intend to use him because at this point, I've got past that point with my own studs. So that's some of the things that happen when you start talking about locking in these studs. I learned that with these Frenchies, unless you have one that's got you locked into that's far out there and there won't be anything, if you already know that he's going to be the first in line with that DNA and you can get in here and be one of the first wave, it may be a good idea. But there's so few things out there now that are new that it behooves a breeder to wait until the female is about ready. Well, unless the stud is so hot that when you try to call them, they're going to not be able to get to your dog because you got all these lock-ins. So like I said, it's a tricky thing, man. And depends on how big your program is and how many females and how many people you have to help with the actual breeding program, the process, as in taking the female to get her PG test, because there's probably going to be more than one trip to the doctor, the vet. So you have to have someone available unless that's you. If you're not a full-time breeder like myself, you end up having to have a team of people to help you deal with all of the different aspects of the breeding process. Getting your female to the vet. Depends on her numbers, getting her back to the vet. Depends on her numbers, getting her back to the vet. Making sure that you get the numbers so you can have somebody now take your male, because right now I do a whole lot of in-house breeding with Botox. So you got to make sure that you get the dog down there. You got to schedule your your surgicals, unless you want to trust doing the breeding AI. The thing that I've noticed with doing the AI yourself, sometimes you have a disconnect with your vet because their thing is we didn't actually do the breeding. We guesstimated the ovulation date, so they like to be able to track those days because they can schedule the C-section, or at least the time for you to bring them back in to see when to schedule it. So, you can save money on the front end by doing AIs, but on the back end, you spend money because you're trying to guesstimate the date of conception. So now you have to keep running to the vet to do reverse progesterone so you can keep up with when she might be ready to deliver pups. So, I mean, I'm just telling you, there are some things that, and most of the stuff I like to speak on is for not necessarily newbies, but people who may have some of these questions about where the real hiccups are, because oftentimes you get to hear about all of the benefits of having great dogs and great marketing and great branding and great kennel and all that, but there's no money to be made without a breeding program with all of the various aspects covered, because you'll lose just as much as you make because you end up missing breedings. Or there are some people that get really smart and don't do the PGs and they just want to AI their dogs. Well, people that have been breeding enough dogs long enough time will be able to tell you that sometimes when they'll do these PGs, you may, or if you do go one PG and you don't feel like going back for a long period of time, your dog's initial test may be baseline. You can tell she's in heat just because it's barely above baseline. And you say, oh man, this dog not gonna be ready for, it's not gonna be ready for another 6-7 days. I'm not gonna keep wasting my money. You go back 5 days later, she's passed. She spiked on you, you missed her. Or you caught her so late that now you do the breeding and you spend 4 weeks with your fingers crossed and find out your dog didn't take. Or you will get there with a stud and you don't get the semen analysis, not knowing that his sperm count is low, because you just took for granted that, especially doing AIs, you don't go do these semen analysis to know the motility and the potency of the volume of the sample that you're using to have inseminated into your female, whether it be surgically, whether it be vaginally, whether it be done with TCI, telescopic, whatever it is, cervical, whatever, I don't know, but TCI. So those are the things, and not to mention the expenses. I mean, a safe amount of money to say you're probably going to expend in a breeding. I'm not talking about the cost of the stud, but I'm talking about the cost of the breeding, not the stud fee. That's all between the owner, the female, and the stud. But as far as the process, I mean, you may spend $400, $500 in the progesterone process. Then you're going to spend another $300 with the surgical, maybe $400. So now you're talking about $800-900 being spent on the front end there. But also the semen analysis, maybe about $400, because that's all going to go with the drawing of the semen and the insemination for the surgical. So you spend about $800 on the front end, $800-900. Let's say $1,000 tops, between $800 and $1,000. That's the front end. Then now you have the actual back end of this, where if you decide if you're going to do the reverse progesterones, and then you may have to go back 2 or 3 times for that. That's another $300, $200 to $300. Then you had a C-section, and depends on what all products, services you want for your female doing a C-section. You could spend up to $900. So now you're talking about $1,200. You're talking about $2,000 for that process. My God. Then the real money starts, because now you have to deal with the part that I was about to get to. That's if you're fortunate enough after the breeding process to actually have a female that got pregnant, because sometimes you spend that money on the front end, $800, paid for the stud fee. If you had a semen shipped, you paid to get the semen shipped, all that good stuff, and then paid for the surgical, and find out 30 to 35 days in, you don't have puppies. So the only thing you get out of that process is you get to get a repeat breeding, but you still have to pay for the breeding process again. So you're about to spend that same $800 for the next breeding, although you don't have to pay for the stud anymore or the next time anyway. So now you start talking about whelpers, and you all, that's where the rubber leaves the road in so many breedings. Sometimes the owner may believe that they're able to whelp their own puppies. When I say whelp, I mean raise the puppies to the age of being weaned off the mother. And usually I like the rule of thumb to be until after they had their second sets of shots. After 8 weeks. I like my puppies to stay with whelpers to 8 weeks because of my busy schedule. But some people get their puppies back at 6 weeks. They've already had one round of shots and they just give them the next round themselves. I don't like that. But anyway, those people that have puppies that make it to 6 and 8 weeks, at this time, based on how everybody that doesn't do their own puppies, seem like somewhere you have whelpers popping up out of the blue, or purported whelpers. I mean, and oftentimes it's people who, unfortunately, oftentimes are way in above their heads. They're way above their heads. And I don't mean, it's not that difficult if you have basic whelping skills or basic whelping experience with your own pups. If you're just going to whelp somebody's pups 1 or 2 litters, that may be something that won't end up becoming problematic. But oftentimes the allure of the money associated with whelping litters creates a greedy spirit in the person who started off really being helpful, useful, an integral part of what it is that you do, because without a whelper, you don't have a litter, not a healthy litter, not a surviving litter. But sometimes the money that's being made in this whelping space causes people to really get in over their heads with the numbers. I mean, I've known people to have as many as 40 puppies and only one person helping them. And the problem you have with that is once 1 or 2 puppies get sick, there's a high risk that all of them may get sick. Even worse, probably will get sick. So, and you oftentimes won't even know that that's going on because you don't actually have a lot of contact with the whelper, except some pictures may be sent, some FaceTime here and there. But that's where most of the times you're going to lose your puppies. I mean, I've been through a lot of whelpers, and it's a big deal, man, because we can have all of these wonderful breedings, but if the puppies don't survive, because the things that seem to be the biggest killers in these whelping environment, it's coccidia. It used to be parvo, but it seems to be coccidia and kennel cough. Yeah, coccidia and kennel cough. And not, of course, parvo, but, the one that seems to be more prevalent now is coccidia. I mean, because it can be dormant for a while and you look up and not really know what's wrong with your puppy, and boom, it's passed it to some more puppies. And that's what happens. So, and they're whelpers that now you have to be careful because they will look at you and charge you based on the value of your puppies. Meaning that, when you start talking about big rope fluffies and big rope Isabellas and, they're looking at what you could possibly profit. And all of a sudden these prices are exorbitant because of how important their work is. But it's the same work they would be doing for somebody else. So you have somebody that may be charging a couple $100 a week. All of a sudden their services are worth $600 a week. Some want $1,000 a week. Plus the expenses of the puppy's litter. You bring their own food and all that stuff. So, you have to be ready, because if you're going to let somebody raise your puppies for 6 to 8 weeks, you do the math, anywhere from $400 a week to $1,000 a week. Do the math. So it's a lot to it. And the question becomes also, I'm sure a lot of people want to know, well, what happens if, are they licensed? Are they bonded? Do they insure anything? Are there any guarantees? Ask yourself this. See, I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney almost 30 years. And I try to explain to people that in my real line of work, you can sue people for anything. The question becomes, and if you do try to enforce what it is you may be awarded, let's say you get a judgment against them for the value of the puppies and this and that, and you already know that you went over there and you saw how they're living, what's the likelihood of that actually being anything you can recover? So even if they have these contracts about this, that, the other, when you look around, what good is the contract? Unless they have some insurance. Because you can tell by the way you see that there, what are they going to pay you with? Like coaches used to say, face and ass. They don't have it. Not to cover what they just cost you. I mean, you lose a few $25,000 puppies. It doesn't equate. I mean, it doesn't add up. So just know that when you're picking these, it's going to be a big trust factor. And you may, they may agree to give you some services or try to replace a puppy with a puppy. But as far as my puppies, very few people are going to be able to replace my puppy with a puppy of same value, same quality, the same ilk. So it won't be of the same ilk. So I'm just going through a few the bigger thing now, because I'm seeing where a lot of people are getting good dogs, and a lot of people are making good breedings. Maybe not the right breeding, but they're good breedings, and that process will improve itself with practice and repetition and a vision. But that vision won't be so clear if you have a litter of 7 pups and they only raise 2. What were the other 5? How close were you to your vision? You really won't know, because 5 of your pups that were part of you being able to see the fruit of your labor didn't make it. So you have to believe that, or you're left to try to see which is the best of the 2, when you may have had 5 better that died. So be very selective and very deliberate about your whelper or your whelping process, because you may decide to do it yourself, but it's a very tedious, very demanding undertaking. And I mean, I found me somebody in my camp now that has demonstrated that they are able to do it. So I think we're going to start doing stuff in-house more. not exclusively, because it still boils down to timing and how many litters and how many puppies in each litter and how many times the mother doesn't help you, because you oftentimes will lose puppies because of that. I've had litters that get too weak for us to be able to help them after we finally realized that the mother's milk was either bad or she wasn't giving them enough milk. So there are all kinds of challenges that come with the whelping process. And that's why, if you can, you use an experienced whelper. And if you can't get an experienced whelper, try to find one who's knowledgeable and a person that's willing to do the research and make the adjustments based on what's going on with your litter. And I can't overstate the importance of the whelping process and the actual whelper, because the other thing you run into, man, what's crazy is sometimes, I mean, and when I say your competition, I'm not really meaning it in the purest sense, but in a business sense, there are some people that may use a whelper that are actually closer to the whelper than you are, and they get to know a little bit too much about your litter. And if they're not truly people that you can trust, you'll start hearing that the puppies died that didn't die. And you may, if you didn't go take a good look at your puppies, or you haven't been keeping up with the growth and making sure you know, identify the markings, some puppies will show up switched with another breeder because that breeder has a better relationship with them. And it's just all kinds of, I mean, this business is not unlike any other. There are some people that are very conniving, untrustworthy, and downright criminal. And they are involved in every aspect of the game. Some of the people with the studs are untrustworthy, downright debaucherous liars. You have some people involved at the vet, or, you look up and they're at the vet either taking pictures of your dog to send to people, to try to send them bad pictures of your stud, just all kinds of stuff, man. And not to mention, you've got to get to the whelpers, man, and you have to trust them that three things. One, they're taking good care of your puppies. Two, that they're making sure your puppies are not being exposed to things that are going to make them sick, or people that are going to make them sick, or that they don't have too many people handling them and they, mishandling your puppies. And the other one is making sure that they're not doing some underhanded stuff to dispossess you of your puppies. So then once that happens, and let's say that all of the stuff works out, and you spent your big bag on your breeding, your big bag on the big bag on your stud feed, your big bag on your breeding, your big bag on your whelping, your birthing, then the big bag on the whelping process. Now you've got taken delivery of your puppies. I mean, hopefully at this point, based on all the expenses, that you really are happy with the breeding and the health of your puppies. Because now you're only going to have what you made. And what I mean by that is, if you didn't make sure that at the time of the breeding, you were trying to improve your production, improve on your brand, and you're just out here planning on having puppies to sell, well, what happens is you look up and now you have to do a lowballing war with other people with just sale puppies, because the whole objective in this breeding thing, and that's why you have to be really clear on your vision, is to have game changers. Now, if you can't produce a game changer, you have to buy a game changer. But the real thing is, regardless of how you get there, you need to be feeding game changers. So the safest way is, of course, is to breed them. But the surest way is to buy a game changer that you see versus hoping to see a game changer just because you bred it. So if that's how we do it, if that's how you do it, you should be more than happy with this dog game. Because when you start talking about spending this money and this breeding stuff, that's definitely some big dog shit. And it should be left to those who either identify as big dogs or at least move like big dogs, because there is no cheap way. There is no cheap way. There may be some inexpensive ways, but cheap, there's no cheap way to get good litters. You may get a cheap breeding. You may have somebody that may help you get a cheap breeding process. What I mean by that is you may get a cheap stud fee. You may get a cheap breeding process. Somebody to do the PGs. You got to trust their machine, because if they use a different machine from the vet that you normally do, and the numbers mean something different, you have to go try to learn the scale on that. You may be wrong. You have to trust that they're true experts, or they have the expertise to operate the machines. That happens too. So there are no real deals if you're trying to be the real deal. There are no deals in becoming a big deal. So that's, once again, falls squarely under what we call big dog shit. Because if you do it any other way, I promise you that corner you cut is going to come back to bite you. So be diligent, be deliberate, and be determined. And if you have anybody that needs to talk, anybody have any questions, I'll be here. So go out. You can find my podcast. The whole thing will be on my YouTube channel. And it's also on Spotify. So a lot of people are asking, hey, where can I see the whole thing? From these different reels that I post, you'll be able to find the entire podcast on my YouTube channel.
Big Dawg Shyt Podcast with your host, George Tucker. Black Card Bully Cam. The Big Dawg Shyt Podcast. Black Card Bully Cam. A Big Dawg Shyt Podcast with your host, George Tucker.
The Big Dawg Shyt Podcast. Put you up on this dog game.
For more information about Black Card Bully Camp's puppies, adult dogs or studs, give us a call or DM us on Instagram